right, welcome everybody to the show. Happy Friday. We've got another great episode of our Fireside Chats. Today I'm joined by Nick Freiling, who's our Director of InsightsHub here at QuestionPro. And we're going to be talking about, I think, a really interesting concept for a lot of folks out there in the research industry, in the insights industry, this concept of, hey, we've done all the work to go run some research, run a study. What now? How do we actually share this thing out? How do we get use out of it? How do we make sure that people are actually seeing the insights, seeing the work that we've done? And I can't think of a better person to talk about that with than Nick. So Nick, thanks for joining today. Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'm always happy to talk about this.
I know you're like the most passionate guy about this stuff. I mean, if you haven't followed Nick on LinkedIn, connect with him. He is always posting great content that I think is just super helpful for the insights industry in general. But Nick, maybe that's a good starting point. Like, tell us a little bit about your background. How did you end up here at QuestionPro?
Yeah. So out of college, I got a job at a big research agency, kind of like internally we call it a research factory. We just kind of like pumped out tons of research every day. We felt like we were on an assembly line. But I quit that after a pretty short amount of time because I kind of saw an opportunity to deliver that same kind of research to smaller companies. And so I did that for 6 years, a little over 6 years, which is a long time I mean, that was basically just out of college when I started that. Learned a lot through that process, a lot of like really kind of specific nuances of what made that process difficult, like the way that tech wasn't working for people that are producing a lot of research, and just delivered or learned a lot. Those little nuances. Met Vivek, talked to him about some of those things. It lined up kind of exactly with this initiative we have here at QuestionPro with InsightsHub around repository storage, storytelling. So yeah, kind of bring a lot of I like to say it's a lot of like firsthand experience. It's fun to solve those problems with the product. Now it's like every problem I had, we're just solving them one after the other. So anyways, it's got my background, a lot of time in the insight space. I've seen it change. Even in the past like 7-8 years, it's changed a good bit.
Interesting. I love that visual, an insights factory, right? Like just things rolling off the assembly line. I'm sure so many people on this show can relate to that, right? Sometimes as insights folks, it just feels like this endless process, right? Request comes in, all right, field work, design the survey, data processing, get it out, right? Assembly line process. And it's an interesting kind of metaphor, right? Because you can put a factory together and you can be pumping out stuff at such a high volume, but if you don't have some way to organize it, whether it's in a warehouse or a retail shelf, like all that stuff is going to get lost. And I think that's probably an area that, like, as insights teams, we maybe don't think about that as much. Like, we really focus on the factory, but we don't actually, focus on the experience of how are people actually consuming the end result, the report, the insight that comes at the end of the research. And so I think that's maybe a good segue to talk a little bit about kind of what InsightsHub is, what's this problem that we're trying to solve for these insights teams that are maybe facing that similar kind of insights factory type of vibe.
Yeah. So I was at an agency, a lot of insights. I don't know what percent of like insights is kind of agency delivered versus in-house, but as an agency, the focus was always like, we want to talk about the next project, so like we would deliver the results and we would kind of, I think we kind of tended to make up some of the work that we could have put into the report, into a deliverable that was more consumer friendly, and say, just hop on the phone and just talk through it. But then we'd have that conversation with like the next team up or another team at that client. And so there was especially because I worked on the quant team a lot too. It's like telling the story sometimes it was like the hard part. It's like that the research we knew how to do, but like telling the story in a way, like ideally we'd be able to make the presentation one time and it would like really sink in. But it was like, hey, let's just get this out so we can talk about the next project. They'll come back with a question every other day. We'll hop on the phone, we'll get it done. But at the end of the day, it's like, we've had like 6 or 7 conversations about this report. That's not how it's supposed to go. I don't know, people hopping off this like research assembly line. You kind of lose continuity too. It's like the client's like, oh yeah, that's like the report we did last year. And, I was like, I wasn't here last year. No, none of us were on this team last year. So I don't know. It was very kind of request driven, but there was a lot more as an agency. But I think even as an in-house team, we could have provided just in the way of like building a narrative rather than
Yeah.
just sending reports. So.
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. And, for all of those that are joining the call, do comment, let us know if you like you might be in that insights factory every now and then. If storytelling is kind of an issue, we'd love to hear from you, and we'll take questions as they come up as well. But Nick, it almost sounds like there's kind of two components to this problem. On one side, you've got this component of storytelling, right? Something comes off the factory floor. What do you actually do, right? Any product that comes off the factory floor, I mean, it's not like it's just ready for somebody to use right away, right? It's got to be packaged. It's got to have some user manual. It's got to be, promoted or delivered to somebody in the right way. And that's kind of the second aspect, right? Is actually the deliverability. Like, how do you get that off the factory floor to the right person? So let's maybe kind of split those two things up and kind of spend 5 minutes on each of them, because I think that's really where InsightsHub comes in, and where this kind of relatively new idea of having an insights repository comes in. So you talked about storytelling, right? Tell us a little bit about what that means, right? What does it mean when you kind of say, hey, we got to tell better stories as insights professionals?
Yeah, so insights is a specialized department, division, or a specialized, if it's an agency, it's a specialized function. It's specialized on purpose because specialists know how to get it done and get it done quickly. They're not always specialists in kind of strategic thinking about how this research integrates into, like, decision makers thinking about price over the past 6 months or something like that. So weaving together a story, as an insights team, like what is the research that you've done. And so there's a story usually that an insights team can tell that nobody else at an organization can tell. That depends though on having, to lead to the kind of the second point, is having some way of systematizing the process whereby you generate and deliver that research. So if a keyword comes up, in August, study you do in August, ideally you if you didn't remember, something would come up to say, hey, back in February, we did a study that was very similar or yielded very similar or very different results. And, you can deliver the August report on its own, but it's 10 times more valuable if you're able to say, hey, since February, there's been a big shift that we didn't even know was going to happen. So that kind of stuff just gets missed a lot. I think the storytelling it's not something that comes naturally to someone that looks for a career in like quantitative analysis. But you just have to think like a decision maker as much as you can. I know, like, again, head down in the data, it's tough to do that, but that makes all the difference. And I did a webinar recently, and I said, it came to me during the webinar, I was like, it's more valuable to to bring up a trend that you're noticing, and just indicate to decision makers, hey, we're seeing something here, than it is to like deliver them like top to bottom A to Z report about this market. That can often be the case, I think.
I think this is something that insights folks miss a lot of times, right? Is like, hey, you're speaking to decision makers, right? And you're analytical, like you're going deep on the study. You feel this kind of need to come up with a 50-page report because we spent 50,000 pounds on this study, we spent 100,000 pounds on this study. Like, clearly, we need to come up with some big report. But at the end of the day, your stakeholders, right, the decision makers that are actually asking for this study, they've got time to read one slide, one page at the end of the day, right? Like, that's what you get in the board meeting. And I think insights people kind of miss that a lot of times, right? They kind of go, hey, let me put all the data on the slides. You're going to be able to dig in. You're going to be able to see exactly the different segments, how we do statistical analysis. It's all going to be there. We're going to have all these lovely charts. And we feel like we need that because the stakeholders spend so much money on it. But in fact, all that matters is a few nuggets that come out of this study at the end of the day. So how do we kind of help insights people get there with InsightsHub? I know that you've kind of designed this in a way where it's very focused on pulling out nuggets, just showing the most important pieces of information, and then giving people the opportunity to drill in if they have the time. How does that work with InsightsHub? How do we kind of guide insights professionals to that place?
Yeah, so in talking with Vivek, our CEO, about this a year ago, we had this idea of, we called it like the currency of insights. So teams, we saw they would have like 1,000 reports that they've done in the past. Each one of them kind of had like findings that were kind of on a different level. Like some were really, really, really confident. or others were really relevant, but they weren't really confident. Others were both. Others were just, hey, this was an interesting finding we weren't looking for. But how do you kind of create a system where you can basically define what a nugget is or what a key finding is
Right.
from every project, raise that up to the top, and then have that be kind of your go-to when you're looking at a study is like, what are our key findings? We know what a key finding is at our organization, and let's bring every project's results up to that singular level, so we can over time say, hey, we've been tracking the number of teens who are interested in our premium subscription product. We've been pulling that out of every study where it's relevant in the same way. And so then you can build a trend without having to go do a study, to see what the trend is. It exists. It happens just because you've been diligent
Right.
about pulling out these key findings, really standardizing your deliverable for each project. The way I talk about these key findings with our users is like they should all be like similar categories in your mind, like of what we learned this here, this there, even if it's a different topic, similar levels of confidence, similar levels of relevance, and then using that to kind of slice and dice different things across your InsightsHub platform. That's kind of
Right.
like the currency. That's what you report these findings. You use these as the launching points for other studies. Use them to make decisions, so that you don't have to sift through kind of the language, the syntax. It's like, here's what we learned. These 14 things. This other study we learned 11 similar things.
Right.
So that's kind of how nuggets work. It's kind of a shift in mindset. I know that at
Yeah.
some agencies are really good about this. Other ones are definitely not.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's I love that kind of phrasing, right? The currency of insights, because I think so many people who work in this industry kind of feel like the currency of insights is how many rows in my raw data, right? How many
Hmm.
charts did I put on those slides? And it's not, right? The people
Hmm.
that are really reading this research, that are funding this research, that are your stakeholders at the end of the day, that's exactly what they're looking for. Key findings,
Hmm.
nuggets. That is the currency that I think insights people have to pull out at the end of the day. And it's almost this kind of forcing function to tell a story. We were at the Market Research Society after event with the Research Club on Tuesday, and I met somebody who her background was in copywriting, and she's basically built this whole expertise with agencies here in the UK, where what she does is she's basically a ghostwriter for them. So she takes
Okay.
all of the research that these insights people and analysts put together, and then she figures out, how do I boil this down to a 3-paragraph story?
Yeah, that's
And
amazing.
that's almost what InsightsHub is forcing you to do, right? Is to say, okay,
Yes.
you've got the report. It's great, right? All that raw data is there. But now I need you to spend 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour taking that 50-page slide deck. It's great. It looks good. You're going to have it there. But I need you to pull out, what are those 10 key findings? What are those 5 key findings? Because that's what your stakeholders really need at the end of the day.
Hmm.
And they need it today, but that's also what they need a year from now or 2 years from now when they want to go back to this research, right? Nobody's going to go and read a 50-page report 2 years from now, but they still will go look at those key findings and those key
Yes.
findings and nuggets at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that person you talk about, that sounds like an awesome job. It's like what I love to do, is kind of turn those insights into something consumable. But yeah, exactly. I mean, and then your point too about people going back. Yeah, people are definitely not going to go back and look at a 50-page slide deck.
Right.
They will go back and look at, like, the top key finding that was extremely relevant and still is from a study you did 2 years ago, especially if it comes up again later.
Right.
Um, I've seen it happen, like in boardrooms, in presentations to investors. Like, you will, they will say, "Oh yeah, I remember, or I've seen a study like this before," and it was, let's say it's something that's super relevant, and you've kind of you've proved that again with this new study that this market does exist. But usually it's like a Google search. Like, you don't even know what to Google to go find that. But in InsightsHub, when it's there, the way we've built the platform is like, you put a keyword. Every piece of research that you've ever done that it mentions that keyword is going to come up. It's the most relevant at the top, least relevant at the bottom.
Right.
So that's just how it's built. It's like, rather than saying, "Oh yeah, I think I've noticed this trend over the years." It's like, well, let's do more than notice it. Let's go look at it and see exactly what happened. And it doesn't mean spending 2 weeks pulling this all back out. Like, you can pull it out
Right.
just by doing the search.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, this is, I mean, this is amazing. I think for those of you that are joining us, I'll just kind of put this on the screen as well. You know, what Nick and I are talking about is really how do insights teams distribute all of those insights content to really make themselves more valuable, you know, give their stakeholders more value at the end of the day. And there's a great ebook here if you want to get some more information on how this all works. But there's really kind of two concepts that Nick and I are talking about. And so one of them, when we think about distribution, is storytelling, which we've kind of talked about, right? Taking that 50-page report and really kind of boiling it down to a few key findings, a few key nuggets. And the other side, which I think you're just starting to talk about, Nick, is this idea of organization, searchability, right? Where we can actually make insights discoverable at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I always hear this kind of story out there where whether you're a team or an external agency, you know, what you find is you've got these stakeholders and they come to you and they always request this research, but it's like, we just did that research a year ago, right? Like, how do I point you in that direction so you don't have to come back to me and commission a new project every single time? I think that's something that we don't think about too much as insights teams. I mean, maybe it's because we like getting that new project all the time, but especially for internal teams, you know, you don't want to be doing the same project if you already did it last year. You just want your stakeholders to kind of be able to find it. So how do you think about that? Organization, searchability, discoverability. How do we tackle that with InsightsHub?
Yeah, well, so actually the thing with storytelling is that ideally it's not just the researcher that can tell the story. If someone's in marketing and they've really been working on a particular trend or a particular market, without the insights team even knowing, the marketing team should be able to go in and say, hey, so we have like 4 years backlog of research on teens or on whatever it is. And let's say like they can build the story themselves just by looking at the research that already exists. And then they can come to the insights team with like saying, hey, I see we've done this study. I see we've done this study. Let's do this one that builds on these rather than just kind of repeats work that's already been done. So just kind of functionally in InsightsHub, the way that works is there is kind of like organization-wide access for free to all of that and all of this that research. It's, you know, the editors is different. The people can edit, create, delete projects, but anyone at an organization can view the research that's been done. And so the idea is that, you know, stories aren't just written by researchers; they can be kind of put together by other decision makers that see maybe you present to them about a topic. They like it, they go back and they look at the 4 other studies you've done in the past that maybe you just forgot to bring up or you reference them. And then they can come in and build their own stories, discover things that, you know, from their perspective, it looks like you're delivering that to them, even though maybe you're like, oh yeah, you know, I didn't think of that, but I guess we did have that story just by the virtue of the work that we've done. Just kind of like multiplies the value you offer to decision makers when they have access to go see everything you've done in the past, without having to think to go ask you for it.
That's it. I mean, I think this is what it all comes down to is how do you multiply the value of an insights team, right? If you think about this structurally, like no matter what, if you're an internal insights team or you're an external insights team, you're a small group, right? I mean, you're a group of maybe 4, 5, 10 people, and you've got way more stakeholders than you have insights people, right? So you've probably got, you know, hundreds of brand managers, product people, UX people that you have to go and deliver research for. But you're going to get lost in that mix, right? Unless you're actually going out there and bringing more value to the organization, multiplying that value to the organization. And I think we find that a lot. I mean, again, comment in the stream if you kind of feel like this is something that you're facing in your organization. But we see this so often with our clients, with our community, where they kind of become best friends with one organization, like one internal group, and that's what they're kind of doing all the research for. And then nobody else is able to see, oh, wait, this insights team is providing us so much value. And so this idea of democratizing insights, making it available to everybody, giving people the ability to search and see all of this value that you've created over time. Very simply, it's like, do you deliver one report to one stakeholder, or do you give that stakeholder access to the 100 different studies that you've run over the past 5 years? That second scenario is multiplication of value, right? That's how an insights team gets more value in the organization.
Yeah, it should never be the case that anyone at the organization wonders like what the insights team is doing, or ever thinks like we haven't heard from them in a while. And like for better or worse, or for worse, like especially in the economy today, it's like, I see companies, friends getting laid off. It's like, you need to
Yeah,
make sure that you're top of mind all the time. And
exactly.
that's what a platform like InsightsHub or whatever system you're using should do for you. It should be, every day there should be something coming out of your team, whether
Right,
it's just sharing key findings that you discovered in a study last week. But like, I also say delivering a report one time, like that's the beginning of what should be a long
right,
tail of like distributing
right.
that stuff to everybody. And I was going to say what you said too about like, don't become best friends with just marketing or just product. Like,
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
more people you can bring value to, the more valuable your team is going to be seen, especially with these like rounds of layoffs, which I hate even to talk about, but it's like
Yeah,
insights needs to be present. It doesn't,
yeah,
unfortunately it's not always the case that um, the teams that aren't providing value are the ones kind of getting pushed to the side. It's like, whoever decision makers know in their minds is delivering value, that's who they want to keep around. And I think insights teams are
exactly.
always positioned to do that, as long as they're talking. Is you just got to start talking, you got to put yourself out there.
Exactly. I mean, we all have to do that, right? No matter what the economic climate is, right? We
Yes.
all have to show value to our organizations. And, this question that we've got up on the screen, I think is a great example here, right? I mean, this is such a lovely question to kind of dive in on and paint the picture of how this can all work. So, I mean, first off, this person's done 150 different ad tests. I'm sure a lot
Hmm.
of people on this call can resonate, right? Like you're just pumping this stuff out. And obviously, like you can deliver one ad test to a stakeholder, or you can make 150 searchable, right? Which is multiplying value. It's making all of those searchable and easy to find things. But how do we actually do that, right? So how are we mining across these different 150 tests in InsightsHub? So there's this concept of search, of nuggets, of tags. Tell us a little bit more using this kind of example, right? I think this is a very
Yeah.
common example for insights teams.
Yeah, so actually this one's interesting because it says, so if you've done 150 different ad tests,
Mm-hmm.
are you able to find out something about your brand? So like the ads might be about a particular product, but because of the way the results happened, every time, or the trends you're seeing, what insights can you pull from those tests that might speak to something about your brand in general? So as long as you're,
Mm-hmm.
so in this case, I'd say, every time you do that test, it takes 10 seconds to set up an Insights Hub project. Pull out the key findings from the, even if it's something like, let's say you ran, you did A/B test of an ad, one was,
Right.
pink and one was purple, and you said, 80% of the time the purple ad won, and that was your key finding. After you've done that for 150 different kinds of tests, you're able to see if you've linked those to knowledge graphs, if you've tagged those. You're able to like literally type in things like purple, like let's say like your branding, it includes different color
Right.
elements. You're thinking about, how to kind of message your product visually. You could do a search for like purple, or do a search for color, and see, hey, every time we ran an ad, it was like the pinks and purples were always kind of winning. Um, our logos on each one of those ads. Like, what does that tell us about our brand? All of a sudden, these ad tests turn into something you can bring into kind of analysis of your brand itself, because you see clear trends, maybe across ads for different kinds of products, but always your brand, always your company, always these particular color combinations winning.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, it's like, hey, we had 150 ad tests. And we know from this that these particular colors resonate really well with our customer base. Let's look at our brand in this light. Again, just because you have these tests indexed, searchable, organized, you can pull out findings for, and I call them kind of like meta findings. Like you weren't doing a color study on your branding, but because you've done all this other research that's related,
Right.
suddenly it's like, okay, we do have a lot of info to pull into an analysis of our brand itself for a rebrand, whatever it is. So it's good not to think about insights request as like a lot of times people will say like kind of ad hoc or kind of one off.
Mm.
We need to learn about like what colors should we rebrand, or whatever, something like that. That is, you can do a project and get an answer, but ideally you should be pulling in like everything you've ever done, and then deciding if you even have to do a project. Number one, you can save you money, or number two, the project you do around that topic should be informed by everything you already know, not just,
Right.
hey, what do you think? Or, this researcher who started 8 months ago, what do you think? It's like, hey, we have 8 years of ad test studies, of audience studies, of messaging studies.
Mm-hmm.
Let's like build that into our rebrand, and build a better study, to kind of get a definitive answer.
Exactly. And I think, part of that is also thinking about like, what are the different aspects that are coming out of those 150 ad tests, right? So we kind of go through, okay, we've got 150 ads, out there, these different tests that are there. And what we want to do now is, well, each of those tests probably has some key findings, some key nugget that came out of there. But they could be on a variety of different things, right? So you talked about color, right? The color of the brand, the color of the background. Maybe that's a key finding that you're seeing in 25 of those different brand tests. Maybe another 25 of those brand tests or ad tests were specific to the millennial generation. And so you actually learn something about how does the millennial generation view our brand versus the baby boomer generation, right? And now you've got a whole slew of key nuggets that are coming out of another 50 of these tests.
Yes.
Another one might be around the tagline of your brand and how those different things perform. So the way I always like to think about this is just kind of almost build a pyramid, right? You've got 150 ad tests, which is kind of the bottom of the pyramid. Now, each of those have some key findings that came out of those ad tests. That's kind of the first thing you want to document, right? Hopefully you've got that there in an executive summary.
Yeah, like the direct question that was answered.
Exactly. Then you've got maybe, call it 300 different key findings or nuggets. Now what we want to do is start to apply a taxonomy on top of them. So you look at all of those, and I think this is what people should always think about when they're onboarding into InsightsHub is like, what is the taxonomy that's coming out of these 150 different ad tests? So again, one taxonomy might be a generation, right? What's the age group of the audience where we're getting key insights from? One might be color, one might be tagline, one might be regionalization. And now you go and you can actually apply all of those tags in InsightsHub. So now when a stakeholder comes in and says, well, you've done these 150 ad tests, but I need to know how is our brand performing with Gen Z or with millennials? Cool. I just type in that keyword and now I get all of the key findings related to that generation. Is that kind of the way that things work?
Yeah. So it definitely 100%. Even further than that, we have something called knowledge graphs where across even taxonomy, you can just you would think ahead of times of particular themes you want to be tracking. And what I say to teams is like, hey, think of things your decision makers haven't thought of yet. Like, again, like go back, it's a simple example, like color. Like, we're going to track the performance of the different colors, in the backgrounds of the color palettes of our ads. We're just going to track that in the background over like 2 years. And then you pin all of those to what's called a knowledge graph. And then you're able to pull that up and show anybody and say, hey, look, we have 2 years of back data on the topic of color, anytime it's ever come up. And then you're able to say, so, cut that and say like millennials color, boomers color, whatever it is. You have this like study that you didn't even do, or you have a report for a study you never even did that answers a lot of questions about, color and messaging. Just because you were organized as you did that research, just because you ran that research like through InsightsHub, and made sure that it wasn't just going into a shared drive somewhere, that it was going to be that it was going to be used in a way that informed your thinking about this topic. Even if it was done 2 years ago, doesn't mean it's not relevant now. It probably is more relevant than people even realize. Right. So yeah, exactly. Taxonomy, knowledge graphs, thinking about themes to pin things to over time. Again, I think it's awesome if you could think of something that decision makers haven't asked you about, because then it's like you're coming to them with like a completely original, kind of entrepreneurial insight about the brand. Like if that's not adding value to your organization, I don't know what else is.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for this wonderful question. This has just been a fantastic conversation. I'm surprised that we've already gotten through almost a half hour, but clearly this is a hot topic in terms of, how do you go about distributing your insights? How do you get the maximum impact from it? Do take a scan of this QR code. Nick's put together a fantastic guide that talks about a lot of these concepts, right? How do we get those insights out there to our organizations, to our clients? What we talked about on this session were kind of, I think, the two key elements, right? This element of storytelling and the element of kind of organization and distribution. Do give this a read. Check out InsightsHub if you have a chance. We're always here to kind of help talk about these things, but I do think that this is kind of the next phase for insights teams is we've gotten really, really good at running studies and we can just go right back to the top of the conversation, right? Like I think we've gotten really good at doing the insights factory. we haven't gotten as good at doing the insights retail, right?
Yeah,
Really putting the
100%.
right things on the shelf and making it findable for people. So I hope everybody had a good time kind of digesting this information. I think there's a lot more that we can talk about here, but Nick, it's been absolutely fantastic to have you here. Any last kind of closing words before we let you go?
I guess I would say what I said last week at a different event is just put yourself out there, put your research out there. If you're not sure like about these themes or about what decision makers are thinking or going to think, just start sharing more, start sharing a little more than you used to, and then see what happens.
Multiply your value, right? At the end of the day, how do you get that study that you've done in front of more people? And how do you make it so it's not one time, right? It's not just this quarter's study, but it can always be helpful for years in the future. I love that concept. I think every insights professional should be thinking about that. How do I multiply my value at the end of the day?
Exactly.
Nick, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us, and everybody else out there, thank you so much for coming, and we'll look forward to the next one.